Hello, and welcome to the next edition of Model Aviation Live. It's Friday, February 19th, and if you're not aware, we've gotten a lot of snow here in Indiana. We received about 9 inches of snow on Monday into Tuesday, and then we got another few inches of snow yesterday. So very thankful to be working from home today and talking to you as I always do in my home office, and definitely want to share some interesting information with you. So in previous shows, I've shared occasionally with you projects that I've worked on. Maybe they're projects I've just completed or projects I worked on in the past. Normally, I've shown you some airplanes. So I thought you might find interest in my latest project. I used to, occasionally work with Legos when I was a kid, but I haven't done it as an adult. And I got a project which Matt will put on the screen here for us. I did as you can see, I did the Lego Empire State Building, but I kit bashed it, so to speak, because I added King Kong, and I also added the biplane. And that is from the Peter Jackson movie, I believe, that came out in 2005. So the timing is good because if you don't know, there's going to be a movie next month, Godzilla versus Kong. So we're going to see the two of them battle, which I guess hasn't happened, I believe, since the 70s. So anyway, I just thought you might find that interesting. Obviously, for me, it had to have a little bit of an aviation flair. The picture that you see is taken in my home photo studio of sorts. I've mentioned to you in the past that I set up a photo studio. That's my dining room table with an actual backdrop, and I have studio lighting, so I can work on product reviews and take photos here from home. So that's where I took that photo. But I just thought it would be an interesting one to share, and especially kind of interesting with the movie coming out next month. So also, I want to talk to you about how you can win free stuff. And we talked about this last month if you joined, but we're giving away, with the help of Andy Clancy Designs, the gentleman who designed the Lazy Bee, we are giving away 2 free kits. So if you're familiar with the About Us, is something that I started about 12 years ago. And I was asked to do an article about Dubro's 50th anniversary. And I came up with this idea about, well, what if we tell the story of companies in our industry, but we also give free products away from those companies? Because let's face it, who doesn't like to win free product, right? So this is the first one we've done in a little over a year, I believe. And it's on Andy Clancy Designs, the gentleman, as I said, who designed the Lazy Bee and all the other bee variants of aircraft. So you can learn more about how the Lazy Bee came about and how the company came about. And you can also enter to win. We're going to have 2 winners. Each winner, that's picked at random. Basically, you just answer a question in the article. And this is out now for digital. This is the March issue. So if you get Model Aviation Digital, you can read this article now, and you can send me an email with your answer, because there's a question in the article that you send me an answer. And if you get print, you'll have this in probably about a week or so. You'll have this issue, and you'll have plenty of time. You've got till the end of next month to get me your answers. But definitely read the article, learn some more about Andy Clancy and all of his bee designs and how the Lazy Bee came about, and get a chance to win. So not only are 2 people going to win a kit, each win a kit, you get to pick what kit you want. So of all the kits on his website, you decide. So if you want a Lazy Bee or the, Speedy Bee, or I think he has 4, if I'm not mistaken, 4 kits currently available. So when we randomly pick the winners, you'll get to decide which kit that you would like. And the About Us is, it's something that we've done, like I said, over the years. We've done Balls USA, 3D Hobby Shop, Bob Smith Industries, done several of them. I'm going to continue to do those. It's been a little bit of a delay since I'd done the last one, but I definitely want to share the stories of companies in our industry, and I definitely want to give the readers a chance to win free product. So that's the first one, but I'm working on lining up a few others. So we'll probably at least have 2 more this year where you can win products. So definitely take a look out for that if you have digital now, and if you have print in about a week or so. I also want to share with you, part of this show is to give you kind of a sneak peek of what's upcoming. So let's talk just briefly about the April issue. So the April issue, we have something really special, I think, and that is the Toledo show. all of us were saddened last year to hear that that show is not going to continue. So we worked, the Model Aviation team worked with several people, both involved with the Toledo show and the Weak Signals Club, and also just other people that have been vendors and participants. And we did an 8-page article on the Toledo show. So we're going to talk to you about the history and kind of give you the insight of how the Toledo show began. We're going to talk to you about the different places that the Toledo show was held. So this is a sneak peek, this picture you're seeing now. I believe this picture is from the late 70s, and it's stitched together. I think it's 4 pictures total. And this is, previously where the Toledo show was held is what you're seeing. So we're going to share that with you, this picture and several other pictures, and let you know what transpired over all these years and what people remember. And I think it's a really fun article for us all to look back on, because I think we're all, that all of us that go to Toledo or read articles about Toledo or watched videos around Toledo, I think we're all going to miss it, this April. I know I am. And so I wanted to share with you an article so that we can all kind of reminisce, and learn more about the beginnings of the show. And I shared once before, but the first time I went to the show was in 2008. And I was asked to go to the show as a guest of Searmark, Steve Chow. And I was asked to help out in the Dave Patrick booth because Steve was helping Dave bring Dave Patrick models back. And unfortunately, Dave Patrick had an emergency and had to leave. So I only had an hour with Dave Patrick, and I was told I was going to run the booth for the 3 days at the Toledo show with only an hour of talking to Dave Patrick. We had 2 airplanes in the booth. That we had the regular Cub and the clipped wing Cub, and the clipped wing Cub was electric. And I asked Dave all the questions I could think of while I was in the booth that people might ask me. And we had RC Universe came by and did an interview with me, and other people came and wanted to talk to Dave and wanted to find out when they could get the new aircraft. So it was an interesting experience for my first Toledo. And because I was running the booth, I really didn't get to get out of the booth except for lunch. So I would spend 15 minutes of my lunch eating as fast as I could, so I could then walk the show floor for the remaining 15 to 20 minutes because I wanted to see it. I wanted to be able to see the show. And I was so busy on Thursday talking to Dave and making sure the booth was ready that I really get to see the show. Interestingly, I also met several of the people at AMA that I'd never met at the show. And in 2008, it turned out was the year that I got hired at AMA. So I had not applied by the time of the Toledo show in April. I think I applied to AMA in May of 2008, and I came out for an interview here to Muncie, and I started in June of 2008. So it's kind of interesting. So next year, in 2009, I came back to the Toledo show, and at that point, I was the assistant editor. Michael Ramsey was the editor, and I was the assistant editor. So we were basically just going around and obviously talking to vendors and taking photos about new products. And as you all know, later I changed that to videos, where I would do video interviews with several of the vendors to talk about their products. So, it's definitely a change from the first year working in a booth and not really getting to see the show to every year after that, getting to see all of the show and talking to the vendors about their products. And so I certainly was saddened to hear of the loss of Toledo. So I hope that everyone enjoys the article and learns a little bit more about the show. And if you want to share or reminisce about it afterwards, that would be great. We might be able to do something after the fact too. If people want to share photos or memories, that might be something we can do online after the fact. So look forward to that in the April issue, which is out in March. It'll be out around the 15th. Normally it's the 15th of March for the digital edition, and then the end of March for the print edition. I also want to share a little bit with you about what's coming up in the next Park Pilot, which is the spring issue. So I'm going to share with you one article in the spring issue, and that's Tim Bailiff. He does have a airplane that he designed that's kind of like a miniature slow stick. So we have a picture of that we can share with you. It's called the Matchstick. So that's Tim Bailiff, and that's the Matchstick. So in the next Park Pilot, the spring issue, we're going to provide free plans to build the Matchstick. So you can look forward to that. Also, There's a comment here by Douglas Hart. Thanks for your comment, Douglas. I meant to mention that there is a show planned at the Seagate Center where Toledo happens, or normally happen. It's more of a swap meet, but that's correct. There is a show planned for this year. It's not the show that was previously the Toledo show. So that's really good news, to have that come back as more of a swap meet, and who knows where it might build from there. So thank you, Douglas, for mentioning that. I did mean to say that in case people didn't know. Okay, so we talked about what's coming up in the next Park Pilot. Let me talk to you about an online exclusive. We've got a really exciting online exclusive, and it's available now. So you can go and see it now. So we got a chance to take a look at the FMS Raphael. And there was only 2 of them in country, only 2 of them in the United States, and John Barnes had one of them. So we did kind of a first look. It's about a 1,200 word article after John spent 1 day flying the airplane. I think he put 5 flights on it. So, and we also did it in Adobe Spark. So it's more of a dynamic article as far as the visuals. So as you're seeing now on your screen, we kind of wanted to test it. Test Spark and see if readers would have interest in that, because it's a little bit more, as I said, dynamic than just text and photos. And you can click on these photos and you can make them larger. So this is available now. You can watch a video. You can read his 1,200 or so word article and kind of get a feel for what John thought of the jet, because right now it's not yet available. It's supposed to be available later this month. You can purchase it from FMS. And Horizon Hobby is also an FMS dealer, so you can buy it from Horizon Hobby. But if you take a look at this article, you can get an idea of John's impressions. And we're going to have a more in-depth article, probably about a 2,000 word article with a longer video. That'll be featured in Model Aviation. But this is a way to, to take a first look at something before it's actually been released. So definitely be sure to check that out. You can go to modelaviation.com and read it and watch the video, and then look for, like I said, a full article and video coming up after that. So again, talking about trying to give first looks or getting an early look at something, I was able to get an early look at the Spectrum NX10. I actually received the NX6 and I received the NX10, and I did a video, and Matt, who is helping me, who always helps me on the show, Matt did the video for this, and you all know him as the host of AMA Air. So this video is already out there too. So you can go to our YouTube channel, or you can go to modelaviation.com, and I give a first look at the NX6 and the NX10. And beyond that, I'm doing a full review. The NX10 will appear in the April issue of Model Aviation, and the NX6 will appear in the spring Park Pilot. So if you're interested in these radios or want to learn about the differences, because they are replacing the DX line for the most part. The DX radios that have an E at the end for entry level, those are staying around. But like the DX7, the DX8, the DX9, the DX18, those are all being discontinued. So if you're interested in learning about the NX radios and what they bring, like Wi-Fi connectivity, for one example, you can watch the video and then see a more in-depth look, as I said, in the next issue of April issue of Model Aviation, and you can see the NX6 in Park Pilot. So definitely take a look at that. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on that. The comments in the feature of YouTube there's been a lot of good comments around the information that people got from that. So I hope you take the time to watch that if you're interested in those radios. So let's talk a little bit about my guest. I'm guessing you probably know who my guest is, because we shared that on AMA Air, and it's been shared on modelaviation.com. But normally when I have guests on the show, the focus is on the guest, and that will be the case again today. But given who the guest is, it's also, you're going to hear a little bit more about my past, because the guest today is my father. And to be honest with you, if it wasn't for my father, I certainly don't think I'd be sitting here talking to you today, because my father was involved in model aviation, early on, and introduced it to me. And he also owned a hobby shop and worked in other hobby shops. So that connection obviously led me down the path of model aviation. And so I think it's probably fair to say that I wouldn't be working for AMA and be the editor of Model Aviation and Park Pilot for almost 13 years. As I mentioned earlier in the show, June 30th will be my 13-year anniversary, and it's been such a privilege to work on the magazine and work with you all and work with vendors and advertisers. And, I really think I have my dad to thank for that. And in fact, I was told that I'm the longest serving editor the magazine's had since 1975. Model Aviation became a standalone magazine in 1975, and I've been told that I'm the longest running editor, and it's really a privilege. So I want to thank everyone for all their support over that time, and I want to bring my dad out so we can talk to him about his history in the hobby and my history in the hobby, and you can learn a little bit more about your editor. So, hi, Dad.
Hello, Jay. How are you?
Good. So, not to confuse everybody, my father's name is also Jay. So I'm Jay Smith, he's Jay Smith, but we have different middle names. So basically, firstly, he's in Florida, and that's where I'm from. So I'm not a big fan of winter. As I told you, we've got 10 plus inches of snow outside, and it's pretty, but I like being able to fly year round. So my father is sitting in his hobby room in Florida where he can fly year round. What's your weather today, Dad?
It's kind of overcast and cloudy, and it's not really cold, but it's cool. It's in the 70s, I believe. Supposed to get cooler tonight, but we're getting a little rain. But it'll clear out. It's supposed to be getting nicer.
Here in Muncie, Indiana today, it's 12 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's a bit cold. But hey, you know that because you're from Maine. You were born in Maine.
That's true.
So
that's
you know
the part
that.
I don't miss about Maine.
Yeah. So for those of you that are familiar with Ray Labonte and Ray and Robin's Hobby Center, my family has a cabin that's on the same exit as Ray's Hobby Center. So we literally drive by Ray's hobby store on the way to our cabin, and I sometimes go up there and visit. So like when I did the article on the Horizon Air Meet, I stayed at our family's cabin, and it's really nice to have Ray's store so close. So in talking about Maine, Dad, let's kind of start off with your beginnings in the hobby. How were you introduced in the hobby, and what did that entail? How did you get involved?
Well, when I was really young, I built a lot of plastic models. They were real popular, and we were building AMT custom kits plus airplanes. I always liked World War II airplanes. The P-40 was my favorite. And then after that, I started with a Cox P-40 U-control and flew that through the later grade school years. And then when I got into high school, I had advanced to 35 powered control line planes. I had busters and shoestring stunners and ringmasters and things like that. And then at the end of high school, I kind of went away from the hobbies for a while because that's when girls became interesting, and I went on, and then I got back and did some other stuff. And I always used to go to the flying field. There was one close to where we used to live. I used to go out there and watch them fly. And that was the year when everybody had a Gold Craft transmitter. I remember those plain as day. And that's when I got interested in RC. It was still fairly young then, and it wasn't tube type radios or anything like that, but they still were nothing like we have today. And I used to go watch them fly all the time. And actually then I got interested, and I built one plane, and then I bought a used plane, and that was just an airframe, and put my radio stuff in it and started flying again. And that's when, about the time that you started again, and I think you were still in grade school at that time, grade school, maybe 6th, 7th grade, when Mike Kelly used to buddy box with you.
I wasn't even that far along. In fact, we've got a photo. Matt will share a photo in just a second with me as a little kid flying. So that should come up here on the screen momentarily. And Mike Kelly is in the photo, and you're in the photo. So here it is. So I'm the little guy in the front. I think I'm about 6 there, probably. And my father is behind me to the right as you're looking at the photo. And Mike Kelly is on the left. And Mike Kelly is a close friend of my father's. And Mike and his dad, Roland, flew with us quite often. And as I recall, Dad, you wanted Mike to teach me how to fly. You thought it might be better to have someone else teach me how to fly. I mean, I think you buddy boxed with me a little, but like in that picture, Mike has the transmitter. He's buddy boxing with me. So right. As I recall, you wanted Mike and Roland to teach me how to fly. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's always easier to teach your kids something if somebody else does it. Like learning to drive, it's the same thing. It's hard for you to learn to drive from your father or mother, but you can learn from somebody else, So it worked out really good. You picked it up quite quickly. And that was to do with Atari and things like that, I'm sure, with your fingers, you picked it up pretty quickly. And that was at the time when we were doing boats, and we got into electric 12 scale road race cars after this for a while, and then we went to boats, and then we went down the road to several things. We were into all kinds of things, radio control. The things kept getting better and better. When we were in RC cars, the trick radio at the time was a brown box steering wheel Futaba radio. If you look at that today, it's like a Model T compared to the radios they have today with all the adjustments and the trims and things that you can do. It's just amazing, how far it's come. And we had a lot of fun. We did 8 scale, we did 10 scale, we did 12 scale cars. The 8 scale were gasoline powered nitros. And we got back into airplanes again. And then I rotated between boats and airplanes off and on. I'd run boats for about 5 years and then go on back to airplanes. And sometimes I did both of them at the same time. And then when you got interested in electric airplanes, that gave me a whole new meaning to electric airplanes, because when I remembered electric airplanes, they hardly flew. Just staying in the air was amazing. And now it's amazing what a little airplane can do now with an electric motor. It's really cool.
So in that photo, I'm holding a Futaba transmitter. We were using at that time Futaba transmitters, and so that was, it was obviously fully proportional. So, Dad, your start in RC, did that happen in Florida, or did you do any RC in Maine?
I never did any RC in Maine. It was later in Florida. And when I bought my first radio, it was an MRC radio. It was a black colored box, and it was on 72 160, if I remember right, back when they only had a few channels. And and then I got going on boats. I kind of set that aside, and then when we came back, Futaba was the ticket. So we went with Futaba for a while because they were easy to get, and everybody seemed to be using them. And the crafts were disappearing fast. They were, because they had gone out of making radios, and we just went on from there. I mean, the electric planes, we went to CEF almost every year. I think I went for the first 10 or more years, I think. Every year, you and I went.
Right.
And in fact, we even went one year after you went out to live in Indiana. We went to CEF together. But that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. It was like being in heaven, being there, seeing all those airplanes and all the different things people were doing and projects, and it was really cool. That's one thing I've always liked about the hobby, is seeing what other people have gotten on their mind and what they come up with, and some people have just amazing things they come up with, and it starts you thinking about things you can do and how you can modify their idea, and it leads to some interesting stuff usually.
So real quick, before we continue talking, I want to highlight a comment by Ted Brindle. And he mentions the swap meet coming up in April in Dayton, Ohio. So I believe if it's the same swap meet that actually some people I know went to last year, and they said that was a really great swap meet. So in case people didn't see that in the comments, I just wanted to highlight there is a really a nice swap meet that happens in Dayton. And of course, if you're in Dayton, you can go to the Air Force Museum, which is phenomenal. And right across the street from the Air Force Museum is the hobby shop that Dave has. So there's a lot of neat things to see in Dayton. So I wanted to highlight that really quick. So when we flew model airplanes, we had to drive over the Skyway Bridge to go. So it was a long drive. It wasn't just around the corner. When I was a kid, we flew where my high school ended up first. I think we flew what ended up being my high school. So we flew there before it became it wasn't my high school then. It would later be my high school. But then was that before we started going to the Skyway that we flew at what would become the high school?
Yeah, when it was just a cleared field. Yeah, they used to fly there some. There was another RC field in existence that went out of existence down that road by your high school, where the ball fields were out past there. There was an RC club that was actually there first, and then later, then you guys started flying electric planes in the high school track.
Right. So then we went to fly at the Valkyrie field, which was over the Skyway Bridge. So we're going towards like Sarasota and Bradenton, and it was a long drive from where we lived. It was 45 minutes to an hour. Yeah. And so we would load up in a VW van that was owned by, I believe, Roland Kelly, and Roland and you and I and Mike would all load up and go over there and fly for the day, right?
Right. Yeah, and Tom Bristol used to meet us down there a lot too, because he was the one that originally got in that club and liked everybody, and so we went down there because it was as quick to go there as it was to go in Pinellas North, because the other field was in North Pinellas at that time, one up there. So it was just as quick to go down there, and they had a nice big field, so it was nice.
Yeah, and it wasn't a bad drive, and obviously we loaded up the VW van. Every time I see a VW van now, I think of that, the model airplanes. In fact, some people who are into music might know this, that Sweetwater, the largest music store, I believe, in the world, the largest single music store, Sweetwater in Fort Wayne, and just an hour and 15 minutes north of here. It was started by a gentleman in a VW van, and he would go around and record for people. He had recording equipment, and he would go around in his VW van and record people's music for them. He would go to them, and from that, he built what is now Sweetwater. It's called a campus. They literally have concerts there. They have an outdoor venue. They also own a actual concert venue, like a club in Fort Wayne that they have concerts. And they have concerts at the actual Sweetwater, and they have like tutorial training. Like you can go to like jam nights pre-COVID. You can go to jam nights. Well, what's interesting is they have a VW bus inside. And I don't know if it was his original. They may have just made it look like his original, but they deck it out with all his recording equipment when he started. So when you first walk in the doors, off to the left is this VW bus. And every time I go there, I think, because, I dabble in guitar and bass and whatever. So every time I go there, I think about loading up the VW bus with all the airplanes. And what else is neat is, like, one of the last times I was there, they had the ZZ Top car from Eliminator sitting right next to the VW bus, and it sat in there for like 6 months. The actual ZZ Top car that the last time I saw it from the Eliminator album, the last time I saw it was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio, and then it turns up like 2 years ago at Sweetwater. So anyway, I was just saying that I have memories of loading up airplanes in the VW bus every time I see a VW bus. I mean, some people might think about surfing when they think about a VW bus, or, things like that. But for me, I always think about us loading up our airplanes and doing that trek over to go flying and we would stay all day. We would, they were glow airplanes, and we would fly all day and take lunch. And I think we used to eat lunch at the field, and we'd fly all day.
Yeah, it was a good time. We always had a good time. They were a good group. We did car racing with them, with that same group of people, and several other things we moved through. They moved through at the same time, which was kind of interesting,
Right. Well, I also want to touch base a little bit on your hobby shop experience, but before we get to that, so before you were a hobby shop owner, you worked at the St. Petersburg Times, which was the newspaper. It's not called that now, but it was the newspaper for the Tampa Bay area, and specifically Pinellas County. And strangely enough, your boss was also a model pilot, an RC pilot, and he flies out of the Sparks field, and he's been president of the Sparks field. So that was kind of an interesting coincidence as well, that you worked with someone who was very active in model flying.
Yeah, after he retired, he really got going in model flying. He always liked it, but he had done control line when he was in the service, and then he got into RC, and now he has a bunch of planes and flies all the time. He was in RC cars with us too when we had pair.
So obviously, that was an interesting connection. And then my early memories of going to hobby shops was House of Hobbies in Clearwater. It's still around, but it's not in Clearwater. I think it's Palm Harbor now. But House of Hobbies was run by a gentleman who was a previous Marine. Am I correct?
I think that's correct.
Yeah, and it it was one of those places. The hobby shop was one of those places, like a used bookstore, that you like to go into. There's just so much stuff. It's everywhere. It's on the floor. It's all over on display cases, and sometimes you would go in there and you couldn't find things, and you would ask Bob, the gentleman that owned it, Bob. You would ask him, and he would know right where it was, and you could find stuff that had been out of production for years, and he would have a dust-covered box that had a kit or an engine. And I also remember, I was pretty young at that time, so I was at that time interested in the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, and he carried a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stuff, the modules and the manuals. So I used to like that too, beyond looking at plastic models, beyond looking at airplanes and cars. I also checked out that and bought countless Dungeons and Dragons modules and books and dice and stuff from him. So, I mean, was that really the first hobby shop that you frequented? That's what I remember. Was that the first?
Yeah,
hobby
we
shop?
went there quite a bit because he
Yeah.
was neat because you could trade something in that you had that was RC and towards something else if you changed hobbies. Like I had traded an airplane for a boat motor one time or vice versa. And, you know, that was really cool. And you could always go there and find good used airplanes hanging from the ceiling. I mean, he took them in all the time. And you always could find something you could use. I mean, I never went there and didn't come home with something, I tell you. It was a
Right.
neat place. I mean, Bob was an interesting guy. You know, he had been in Clearwater a lot of years and was into drag racing originally a lot. Him, some of it, and his friends. They had a slot car track there when slot car racing was big back in the day, in the 60s and 70s. And he was just a real interesting guy and was very up on everything and how it worked and knew what was going on and you could always find good used stuff, late model stuff, you know, the stuff that you would want, you know, not somebody's cast off stuff, but good used stuff. I always thought that was neat.
I remember he had a really good paint rack too. You could get all kinds of paints and stuff from him. And so interestingly, he's still in business. I don't know that if he's personally involved, but that House of Hobbies is still around. And but they moved from Clearwater. I believe they're in Palm Harbor. Have you ever been there?
I've never been to that store because I think that's the one his wife ran as a second location for a while, and then they moved everything to it. As if I heard the gossip right, but it's in the same area. If it's not in the exact building, it's in the same area because he had two going for a while, two locations. She ran one and he ran one, and I've never been there, but I've always wanted to go see what it looked like. You know, if it was like the old shop or not.
Yeah, we used to joke about how he got through the fire inspector inspections because it was just so clogged with stuff. But you know, it was great. It was great to look through that and see what you could find. And then my next hobby shop memory is Micro World, which was in the Tyrone area in kind of like a strip mall. And there was also a movie theater right there. And you started working there. And how did that
I worked there one day a week.
How did that come about?
Well, he was wanting to sell RC boat stuff because we had an RC boat club, you know, for nitro boats. And he didn't have anybody that knew a lot about boats. So he asked me if I'd work one day a week. And so that worked out perfect for me and paid for some of my parts for my boats. And I helped a lot of people get started in RC boats that way. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I remember that there was a art and framing store, like maybe next door or two doors down. I used to hang out in there sometimes. I don't remember because I would go with you sometimes when you worked. And I don't remember what the gentleman's name was that owned that, but he would do custom framing and all these art supplies. And I remember I hung out in there, and I recall one time I went and saw The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back at the movie theater that was right there by the hobby shop. So I went with you one day and you were working and I went and watched Empire Strikes Back. So I do have fond memories of Micro World. And there was a guy that worked there named Bob who later worked at Gateway Books, who I used to go buy Doctor Who books from and Dungeons and Dragons modules from, and they moved into Seminole Mall. So Bob used to work with you at Micro World, and then he kind of was the manager of Gateway Books and Gifts. So that was kind of neat. You know, years later, as an adult, I would go to Gateway Books and Gifts and buy the little figures, you know, that you paint for like Dungeons and Dragons, or I'd buy Doctor Who books or whatever. And, you know, Bob that you used to work with at Micro World pretty much ran that store. So, but then I recall a big leap. You left the Times to open a hobby shop with Phil Van Hart. And I remember us being at a race at Sunshine Speedway. It was a roundy round race. And the whole idea of opening this hobby shop kind of was discussed at a race at Sunshine Speedway.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing. You know, Phil wanted to open a hobby shop. He asked me if I'd help him. So we got together and opened it. And I was working at the Times full time in the hobby shop full time for like a year or better. And then finally I started working full time at the hobby shop. But I would go to work at the Times 7 at night till 3 in the morning, come home, sleep a couple hours, and be at the hobby shop at 9 o'clock in the morning to work all day, and then go back to work at 7 o'clock. So it was an interesting time, but it grew and grew and grew, and is still in business today.
Yeah, Phil's hobby shop is located on Park Boulevard in Pinellas County, Florida. Unfortunately, Phil Van Hart is no longer with us, and my father sold out of his, half of the business. And so it's run by a guy named Brian, who we used to race boats with. And I think Brian is only about 2 years older than I am. So Brian and I used to hang out at boat races a lot. And Phil, when he passed, he left it to Brian because Brian worked in the hobby shop. So, we still have a connection to it. And I remember when the hobby shop first started, I remember us going in there and building the displays. Like there was these displays that we had to build that had wide bases and you could hang all the stuff on them. And I remember going in and building those displays and setting things up. And then where the windows were covered and the windows were painted where it said like Phil's Hobby Shop. And then there was pegboard so that you could put car parts and stuff where the windows were. So the windows were covered with pegboards. And I remember in the back, we had a soldering station, so you could help people if they needed soldering help. And there was, then it expanded and a slot car track was added. So we had slot car races and it got, expanded to more plastic models. And so what was it like, what was it like being in the hobby business in like what, the 80s? What was that like?
Well, it was interesting back then because new stuff was coming out all the time. New technology was coming out all the time. And there was always interesting stuff to do. And RC cars were big in that period of time. And then I know that one year before Christmas, in 2 weeks, I think I built 20-something frogs, Tamiya frogs, that people bought as a whole thing to give to somebody for Christmas, so I put them all together. And it was fun. That was a good time. That's when everybody was dirt track racing in our area, mostly. And they had that track at Sunshine that was for 10-scale cars.
Yeah, we raced RC10s there.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Right.
See, the nice thing about hobbies is you meet some really nice people and you see the same people doing different hobbies years later. I run into people all the time that I remember from Phil's, from 20 years ago that they're still in the hobbies. It may not be exactly the hobby they were doing before, but they're still doing a hobby that's in the RC field or plastic model field or whatever. And
right.
That's what's kind of interesting. You meet the best people that are in our RC sports, I think, that you meet that do anything.
Right. I'm going to share a funny story that I don't think I've ever said to you. I mean, you were part of the story, but I don't think I've ever mentioned this to you since. I remember I was in the hobby shop with you at Phil's Hobby Shop, and it was just you and I. There was no one else working. And this gentleman came in, and he was interested in some big, it was either a battleship or an aircraft carrier from World War II. And we had it in the shop, and it was huge. The box it was in was huge. And he was really excited about building it. And I remember he brought it up to the register and I saw the price on it and it kind of shocked me how expensive it was. Now I get that it was a really big kit and that, and that's expensive to produce that. But for some reason, just, the price at that time when that was in the 80s, it really surprised me, the price of it. And then, so you were at the register and I was also behind the counter and he brings it up and he sets it down and I look at it and I say to you, wow, this is, $74 or whatever it was. I was just surprised. Like I wasn't saying it wasn't worth it. I was just surprised. And I remember you gave me a glance, it was one of those glances that father and son, that you should shut up now. So I said, wow, this is like $74 or something. And you kind of gave me this quick casual glance. You should shut up now. So I didn't say anything after that. And he bought it. And after he walked out of the shop, there was no one else in the shop. And you said, don't ever do that again. Don't ever question a price because you don't want to talk someone out of buying something. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember. Well,
yeah.
It's amazing what some of the imported kits even back then were, they're super detailed, thousands of parts and everything else. And they were really expensive. But,
yeah,
but that's a big deal, But it's funny.
Right.
Some people that wanted to build that stuff, they may take them 2 years to finish it. It's
right.
just amazing.
Well, I guess I learned a valuable lesson because not only did I work at Phil's Hobby Shop, I also worked at Archie's Hobby Shop, the other hobby shop in our county. And Archie was a friend of ours, him and his son from racing boats. RC Boats is how I first met Archie. And, I was knee high to a grasshopper, as they say. I was very little when I first met him. And, I got the opportunity to work at Archie's Hobby Shop, which I would say back then, Archie's was a bit more focused on airplanes and helicopters, and Phil's was a little bit more focused on surface, like cars and boats, wouldn't you say?
Right. Yep. Yeah, there was kind of an agreement there, so it was kind of unspoken, but we stayed out of his area mostly, and he stayed out of our area mostly, and both did well.
Right. So, Yeah, I remember like when the mini ultra stick came out, the very first time the mini ultra stick came out, was working at Archie's, and I wanted one, and so I would get one at a discount because I worked there, and you and I talked about it, that's just a great airplane, and you have one, but I remember specifically like, and I remember working at both hobby shops that every time the UPS truck or FedEx truck or whatever would come, it was like Christmas because we didn't always know what we were getting. And it's like, oh, look at this, look at this radio, or look at this new Magnum radio, for instance, the pistol grip radio, or look at this new air radio, especially like when the first DX6 came out with Spectrum, with the freedom from having problems with frequencies. And I remember I bought the first DX6 when it came out, the Park Flyer version. And then as soon as the DX7 came out, I upgraded that to that and gave you my DX6. So, to me, working in a hobby shop is like a kid in a candy shop because you get to see all the new products that are coming out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, it's just amazing how much stuff they were coming out with at certain times. It seemed like they get a new something from 3 different manufacturers within a month of each other. And it was like they must all known who was working on what, and they all made improvements. And it's amazing.
Right.
It's just really cool. That's the neat thing about the hobby. It's always going forward. It doesn't ever seem to be going backwards. It always seems to be going forward. And
Right.
neater stuff, more. Whoever thought, that you would see drones, or you would see even helicopters weren't like they are now. Well, they weren't reliable, and they weren't, people flew them, but they were having a lot of teething problems learning how to do it and the technology that was available at that time. And now you see them and they're amazing.
I remember we had a VHS tape of Mike Moss flying inverted for the first time that ever had happened. The first time anyone had flown an RC helicopter inverted, it was Mike Moss. And we had a VHS tape with that video on it, and it was circulating because everybody was just blown away that you could fly RC helicopter inverted.
Yeah, that was amazing. It really was.
I mean, now it's commonplace. It's like nothing. But back then, the technology, wasn't where it is today. And it was, just a really big deal when he did that. And like you said, I mean, the technology just continues to change. And you talked about some of my beginnings in flight. I remember flying like a Gentle Lady, and I remember a Carl Goldberg Eagle 2 that we had built the fuselage, and we went as a family. Well, I'm an only child, and me and my mother went to a movie, and we came back, and the dog had used the fuselage like a chew toy. You remember that?
Oh yeah, I was real happy.
A Carl Goldberg Eagle 2 got chewed up like a chew toy by the dog. And, I guess it taught about building because the fuselage had to be rebuilt. So it was an interesting lesson. And then my first control line experience was with a Cox PT19 that was plastic and held together with rubber bands. So if you had a hard landing or crashed, it popped apart. And that was a lot of fun. I remember
they flew well.
Yeah, I remember taking it to Starkey Elementary School, the elementary school I went to that was just down the street from our house, and flying it all the time with my friends and running the engine. I remember you had an engine test stand that used to break in engines in our backyard, and Mom wasn't too thrilled about that, but I remember hearing engines in the backyard when I was young. But yeah, I have a Cox PT19 to this day. I don't fly it anymore. It's hanging on the wall, kind of as a memento. But all the Cox airplanes were great to get people into flying. And then, you mentioned like I still have the Gentle Lady. And when I flew that, it was on a speed, maybe a speed 400 or speed 600 motor, but it was just off or on. There was no
throttle. Yeah, there was no speed. It was just
full on and full off. Well, I still have that. I still have the Gentle Lady. I keep saying eventually I'm going to put a different motor in it and a speed control where you can fly it, like we do now with electrics. But to your point, I got really interested over 20 years ago in electrics, and Chris Cianelli's radio controlled Hobbies show was on, and he did an episode about electrics, and I said I want to do that. So the next day I went to Phil's hobby shop and bought the first issue of Backyard Flyer, which actually had a review of the GWS Tiger Moth by Chris Cianelli. And I liked I liked biplanes. So I had them order the GWS Tiger Moth. I had an Airtronics radio, so I had them order the flight pack. So I got the Tiger Moth and a flight pack. and I started flying it at Stark Elementary School with no instruction because I previously flown, but I'd had a break, and reacquainted myself with it. And then I connected with some people in RC groups, and we started flying at Osceola Middle School, which was right next door to Osceola High School, which was the location that we flew when I was a little kid before it was Osceola High School. So I got permission to fly at Osceola Middle School because I had been a student there. So there's a picture that Matt's going to share with us where we're holding a GWS Tiger Moth at Osceola Middle School. And I'm going to touch on that real quick when Matt shares that photo. So we were flying at Osceola Middle School. Okay, so I'm the gentleman in the middle with the Snoopy shirt on, and I am holding the World Tour Tiger Moth, which currently resides in the National Model Aviation Museum right here at AMA. And I want to state that I had nothing to do with that. I had nothing to do with the decision of it coming to the museum, but it's cool that it's here. So this idea was hatched on RC groups to build a GWS Tiger Moth and have it flown all over the world. And the Tiger Moth made its way to, where I flew. So that's a group of us that flew at the middle school, and that building behind us is the gymnasium. And they had a big like racquetball court in front of it where you could play wall ball. So we would set up against the wall and we would face the field and we would take off from that concrete that we're standing on. And the Tiger Moth that you see right there, we all flew it and we signed a logbook and we also signed the airplane. So everyone that flew that airplane signed their name on the airplane and they signed a logbook. So all of us in that picture flew the airplane. And as I said, that's all now here at AMA. So here's an interesting story talking about cross-pollination and how you meet up with people later in the hobby. The gentleman on the far left of the picture, that's Glenn Lewis. Glenn Lewis raced RC cars with us in Tampa when I was a little kid. And he used to rewind our motors when that was, allowed in the classes that were allowed. He was I should say he is a very skilled electrical engineer. He's still a builder. He builds almost all his airplanes, and his airplanes have been featured in our magazine even before, I had anything to do with that. And so here we are with the GWS Tiger Moth at Osceola Middle School, never knowing, when that picture was taken, I never knew that I would end up at AMA, and I never knew the airplane would end up at AMA and the National Model Aviation Museum. So it's funny how things work out, but it's just kind of shows you that we had a Park Pilot Club before there was a Park Pilot. This is long before Park Pilot, became a membership category and a magazine. But we would sometimes have as many as 20 people there flying electrics. It was all electrics, and we had permission to fly there. And I was an AMA member, and we would just come on the weekends and fly there. And the agreement was, as long as there weren't kids there that were looking to use the field, we could fly there. So every weekend we would go there and fly. So to your point, Dad, I got so into electrics that I got you into electrics because I came and you and I went to a local park and I let you fly my slow stick, and you were a little uncomfortable flying it, but you picked it right up. And the next day you bought a slow stick. And then I went to the second ever CEF, the first in Georgia, Southeast Electric Flight Festival. And it was the first one at Hodges Hobbies. And I had such a great time meeting all these vendors and like-minded people who liked electrics that you and I went every year after that, like you said, through like the 10th year until I came to AMA. We went to CEF every year. So you got started on that slow stick after I had you fly mine, and you've been flying electric models ever since. And you have been involved in a club who's only electric. The Sarasota Silent Flyers, they used to, back previously, they used to have where you joined with a frequency and you could only fly on that frequency for, to make sure that there was never any frequency issues. But obviously now with 2.4, that's not an issue. But I know they used to limit people. And it's also interesting that you mentioned we used to race RC cars at a raceway at Sunshine Speedway. And then we connected with a gentleman who owned DeSoto Drag Strip at CEF. We met him at a restaurant. We were having lunch, and I don't think we knew, or I didn't know, that he was into airplanes. And now your club flies at the drag strip that you used to race at. You used to drag race there, and now you fly there. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, Alan, was the gentleman's name, and he was a big flyer of all types of electric airplanes, and he lives in North Pinellas, and he was of course going back and forth to the drag strip because he owned it, and so we got to know him. We met him at SEF, but the rest of the people from the club met him there also, and he got real interested and got active, and so behind their maintenance buildings there was a big pasture back there, and he allowed us to put a geodet runway in and fly there, and so we've been there ever since. And he still comes and flies with us all the time. They do a lot of flying together, and he comes down. He sold the track since that time, but he kept the land that our field is on, and so he kept the land so we could fly on it, basically.
Right.
So it's a great place to fly. And the Sarasota Electric Flyers started originally, it was in Sarasota, Florida, and it was a glider club for electric gliders. That's why they call it Scion Flyers. Well, they've moved to Manatee County now, next to the drag strip, but we decided not to change the name because everybody knew it by the Sarasota Scion Flyers. So that's why the site and the name don't match up. But it's all electric. There's no nitro or gasoline powered airplanes. Everything is electric.
And there's a great bunch of people that fly there, and you've even had Kike Samazzini has come there, and several people from Flex Innovations have come and flown there because they're not too far away.
Right, and a lot of the guys from Georgia, from Max Club up there, come down and fly here because they're all friends with the guys down here, so they come down here and fly at certain times of the year and camp out on our flight field and stay for a week or so sometimes. Everybody's a real close-knit group, and we met all these people at SEF also, so it's really interesting. That's how I got hooked up with this club, as I met them at SEF and realized they were in the same area as us, and so I went out to fly with them and been there ever since.
Right. And then there was, speaking of SEF, I touched on this one time before in a previous episode of this show, but I was involved in the Guinness World Record, and you were my spotter, and I flew a Searmark Little Banshee, which is literally sitting on the floor right behind me. I still have it. I've never flown it since we set the Guinness World Record. I believe that was in 2008. Since we set the Guinness World Record, I've never flown it because I didn't want to take a chance of losing it, because it just has a little bit of sentimental value. And so it still has the sticker on it so Tony Stillman, who works at AMA as our technical director, he at that time was the district VP, and he was there as an official for the Guinness World Records to certify that we set a Guinness World Record. And we had a little over 100 airplanes take off, but there was a certain time frame that we had to remain flying. And I was flying on my DX6 radio, 2.4 gigahertz, because we couldn't have done that, without spread spectrum. And I was in the highest altitude to the right. They had us fly in quadrants. So at the end of it, there was 99 airplanes still flying, and I was one of the last to land. And it was really hard to find a spot to land, on the grass field, because there was, probably almost 90 airplanes on the field. But I landed, and I've never, ever flown the airplane since. But that was a really exciting thing to be part of. And they gave us T-shirts, and there's now a plaque there that commemorates it. And, I do want to give a shout out to Flight Test, because they actually beat the record a few years ago at their event at Flight Fest. But at that time, 99 planes, it was a record, and it was really exciting. And I still have my T-shirt that Cliff from Atlanta Hobby, I think he sponsored the shirts. So I still have my T-shirt, and I still have the airplane. And I shared the photo last show. I shared the photo of you and I standing in line, and you were holding the airplane, that's right here behind me. And it was really a really neat experience. So as you said, there was a lot of neat things that came out of SEF, especially in the early days of flying. And, I saw the largest electrics I'd ever seen fly there. Gary Wright would show up with the biggest airplanes I'd ever seen, like the E3D XL, and do 3D aerobatics. And, now electrics are obviously so commonplace, but when we started going there, they weren't as common. So it was a great place. And just like the Arizona Electric Festival and NEAT, there were several pioneering events that shared electric with everyone. So I do have fond memories of that. And, talking again about how people do different things in the hobby, before we wrap up this show in a few minutes, Dad, I want you to I want to share a picture about what you've gotten involved in the last couple of years. So you were a drag racer of, real cars. You had a 55 Chevy, you had a Nova, and then you had a dragster. But now you do slot car drag racing. So Matt's going to share a photo of some of your cars. And I guess probably a lot of people watching, maybe they don't know about this. They don't know that there's slot car drag racing. So tell everyone a little bit about that.
Well, the slot car drag racing, they use the slot car setup on the track where the power is supplied by the track and it's picked up on the cars by the braid, just like the cars you remember when you were kids that went around the ovals and road courses. But it's a drag strip, and we bracket race. So when we bracket race, you got to pick your dial in, just like the bracket races at the real car track. And you pick your dial in, and they spot the tree, the difference between the two dial ins, so that theoretically, if you both had the same tree, you'll both hit the finish line almost the same time. But obviously, there's reaction time and what can the car run and things like that that affect it. But my cars, they cost around $100 to build a car, and the thing will go 42 miles an hour in 55 feet from a standing start. And that's not a big, powerful motor. I just bought a bracket type motor to keep the cost down and the reliability out. But it's great fun. Everything. If you go too fast, the first thing everybody says is, well, what if I dial in so I can't break out, Well, yeah, but then you won't win because you won't run close. You got to get to that finish line real close to your number. If you go too fast, you lose. If you go too slow, you get sent home because somebody beat you there because they're on their number. So it gets very competitive, and it's like regular drag racing. You race till you get down to the final two cars. When you're at the final two cars, whoever wins the race actually wins the total race, and then they also give awards for second and third. So it's great fun, and you can run any body style you want in bracket racing, and you can run any motor, any tire, anything you want. There's just a few basic rules you have to meet about not rubbing the track, not being so low you rub the track and things like that. And it's pretty interesting. And they don't allow, at our track, they don't allow aids like a delay box or anything in your controller. You have to actually watch the lights and catch the light on a good green, because you can red light on the right. And so as there's 3 light bulbs down, and on the 4th light you get a green light, they're half a second apart. But you got a controller that if you left on the last yellow light, when it goes out, you will red light because you're in between there somewhere. So you got to learn in your mind where that sweet spot is for your car to leave. And that makes it interesting too. So it's just like real cars. The cars go faster and slower depending on the track conditions and the temperature. And you can really vary your time depending. If it drops 2 or 3 degrees in that room overnight, like late at night, the cars pick up speed because the track's cold, and it makes them pick up speed. So it's really interesting. It's a lot of fun. And they're in a lot of areas. There's a bunch of tracks. And if you ever get a chance to go see one, go see it. You'll really enjoy it. It's very interesting and a lot of fun. And somebody will let you run one of their cars. It's everybody's really interested in people getting going in it.
And you've kind of made model versions of your vehicles that you race, because I see you have a Nova there, and you have a 55 Chevy on the left, and then you have a dragster on the right. So you basically made models of the drag cars that you had previously, right?
Right. My box is all Chevrolet or Chevrolet powered. That's kind of my thing. I'm a big bow tie fan. And so every car I own is some type of a Chevrolet, and the rail is Chevrolet powered. So the rail is like the last real drag car that I had. And it was called Middle Age Crazy, but I didn't have lettering for that. So one of my friends had taken care of getting me some letters made, and I named it So Long because I figured that's a good name for, you take it 2 ways, like as in see ya, or as in, gee, this car's long, because a real dragster would be about 300 inches long.
Right. And one of the people that races with you is actually a gentleman that raced with you with the full scale, the drag cars, 30 to 40 years ago.
Yep. That's true. That's a lot. I've met 3 or 4 people that actually used to race in the same circuit group that I did when we raced real drag cars, that have got interested in running these, because it's every bit as competitive. It's a lot less expensive, and you don't break a lot of things, and the having to move a car around and store a car and everything isn't happening. You got a box like that, you close it up, put it in your room, come bring it back the next week, and all your cars are right there ready to go. So it's great. Everybody builds some type of a box to carry multiple cars. I started out to have 1 car. And as you can see, a couple of them aren't in there in this picture because I built a 55 Chevy, a new one, and I have 11 cars now. And
well, the same thing happens with, airplanes or helicopters. I mean, you can't, they're like potato chips. You can't have just one. So,
Right. I was
I
up
mean,
to 20 at one time. I had 20 electric planes.
yeah, I mean, you got airplanes hanging up. I've got a bunch of airplanes behind me. In fact, I've got a SHP behind me that's right there that you built, the yellow one, the yellow and black SHP there in gray that you can see. So, I guess to kind of wrap up our conversation, I mentioned it at the beginning that, I mean, obviously, who knows if I'd have gotten into aviation if you had not already had an interest. And, I seriously doubt I'd be sitting here talking to you today as a employee of the AMA, and after being a member for many years, and the executive editor of both publications. So I would say, obviously, I have you to thank for that. And I also want to point out that you made your hobby your job, and there is challenges with that. And I remember when I talked to you about taking this job, you cautioned me about that, about how making your hobby your job at times can take away some of the fun of it. But obviously, you've managed to stay in the hobby your whole life, and with other than a short break. And I had the same short break about when I was about 17. I dropped out of the hobby for a while and got right back into it, and I've been into it ever since. So, I appreciate all the all the fun we had, and the fact that it led me to where I am today. And it's interesting too. I shared last show that you were going to be my next guest, and I shared that David Letterman, who is from this area, he got his start in Elwood, Indiana, which is 45 minutes from Muncie, and there's a actual building named after him at Ball State, which is the college here in Muncie, that's named after him. And his mom, I believe, lived right here in Muncie, and he would have her on his show occasionally. And that's the first thing that I thought about was, well, David Letterman would sometimes bring his mom on the show. So why not bring my father on the show, since you're the reason I'm have this show and work at AMA, and just talk a little bit about your experience, and also find out if I was a good pilot growing up, because I don't really remember if I was or I wasn't. I do remember, it's funny that when we used to fly back then, you used to fly so high, 3 mistakes high. And I guess when you got more proficient, you came down lower. But I think nowadays everybody flies so much lower and closer to the runway, which is fine. Or I should say most people. It's just interesting how things have changed. So it's fun to kind of reminisce, about the past. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on. And, obviously, again, thanks for getting me involved in the hobby.
Yeah, you did well. You picked it up when we got back flying. You picked it up way quicker than I did. It took me a long time to get back, but you picked it up almost immediately. But you had a lot of game controller experience, and I think that gives you a lot of hand-eye coordination, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Atari 2600. We had one of those when they came out, and I have one to this day in my TV room that I play Atari 2600 once in a while, just for nostalgia, I guess. So, well, I greatly appreciate it, and I hope that once this pandemic's over, I can come down and fly with the group at the Sarasota Silent Flyers, because they're all a great bunch of people. And obviously, with the weather here, the only flying I'm doing right now is on the simulator. But thankfully, Real Flight 9.5 actually has the International Aero Modeling Center Site 3 on it, which we call Show Center. And when I moved here, and you came with me, Dad, to help me move here, you flew one of my airplanes from that runway, because you wanted to be able to say you flew from AMA. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the shirt you're wearing right now is an AMA shirt that you bought when you came here and helped me move here almost 13 years ago. It'll be 13 years this June. Is that right?
That's true.
Yeah.
You can't see it, but it has the AMA logo and has the Sarasota Silent Flyer logo on it.
Yeah. So you and I went through the museum when I moved here, and I believe I bought you that shirt as a thank you for helping move me here. And so anyway, we've kind of reached the end of our time, but it was definitely great to chat with you and share some of the past history. And I also want to remind everyone that next month we're going to have another show. And usually I have a guest lined up, but I've been talking to a couple people, just trying to work out their time schedule to make sure they can join us. So the next episode is Friday, March 19th, as you can see on the screen. But I don't have a guest yet, but we will we'll work on getting a guest lined up and announce it. So be sure to join us again next month. And thanks again, Dad. And we'll talk to everyone on Friday, March 19th. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.